Someone call the VA. We've got a stray. The foreman's voice cut through the noise as Ava Morgan limped past, her prosthetic leg visible beneath worn jeans. Wrong turn to the welfare office. Sweetheart, another shouted, triggering cruel laughter. Across the site, Ava gripped her Marine cap tighter, jaw set, eyes forward. She didn't stop, didn't flinch. They didn't know she'd once dragged wounded men through gunfire, that her limp was earned in fire. Not fake for pity. 15 minutes later, the job site went silent. 3 black SUVs roared in. Blocking the entrance, 7 Navy SEALs stepped, out in perfect formation, faces unreadable, boots deliberate. No one knew who they were here for, but the moment they moved toward Ava, every construction worker froze, and for the first time that day, no one laughed. After leaving the Marine Corps, Ava Morgan returned not to parades or celebrations, but to a quiet apartment tucked behind a faded strip mall on Houston's east side. It wasn't much, 2 rooms, a narrow balcony, and neighbors who rarely looked up, but it was hers, a place where no one asked questions, and silence was as steady as the ticking of her wall clock. Every Tuesday, she followed the same routine. She packed her olive duffel, slung it over her shoulder, and boarded the 77 bus headed toward the VA Medical Center. The bag carried her medications, a notepad filled with reminders, and an old Marine cap, creased and sun-faded, tucked carefully at the bottom. She never wore it, but she couldn't leave it behind. That cap had been through 2 tours and 3 firefights. It was the last piece of a life she no longer spoke of. Her left leg, amputated below the knee after an IED blast outside Fallujah, had been replaced by a high-tech prosthetic. Its surface was matte black and functional, not flashy. Each step she took on it made a soft, deliberate click. To some, that sound was awkward, foreign, but to Ava, it was a rhythm she understood, a reminder that she was still moving forward. Neighbors knew her only in passing. Quiet lady, they'd say, always polite, always alone. Kids stared sometimes at her leg or asked rude questions when they thought she couldn't hear. She never responded. She wasn't there to explain herself. At night, the memories returned like uninvited guests, the scream of mortar shells, the static of broken radios, the pressure of a wounded comrade's blood on her hands. She'd sit by the window long after midnight, watching headlights pass through the blinds like searchlights sweeping a compound. Her apartment was still, but inside her mind, battles replayed. Yet, she never complained, never talked about what she'd lost. Ava Morgan didn't wear her pain like a flag. She wore it like armor, quiet, invisible, and unshakable. Her war had ended, but the discipline remained. And though the world around her had forgotten what she gave, she remembered every day. Houston's midday sun showed no mercy. It beat down on the sprawling construction site, casting harsh shadows across stacks of cinder blocks, scaffolding, and half-framed walls. The air shimmered above the asphalt, thick with red dust and the steady pounding of hammers. Trucks rumbled in and out. Sparks flew from welding torches. Voices shouted over the din of progress. Ava Morgan walked along the cracked sidewalk that bordered the site, her steps measured, her prosthetic clicking faintly with each stride. She had made this walk dozens of times, heading toward the VA clinic just 5 blocks away. Worn jeans, faded green t-shirt, sun-darkened skin, a woman on a quiet mission, unnoticed by most. But today, someone noticed. Hey, a voice shouted from beyond the fence. Wrong turn to the welfare office, sweetheart. The words hung in the air for a split second, then broke into laughter, sharp, juvenile, cruel. Ava didn't break stride. Her jaw tensed, but her eyes stayed forward. On the second-floor scaffolding, 3 workers in neon vests leaned over, nudging each other. One mimicked her limp, another took a dramatic fall, fake screaming, then roared. With laughter, she probably got that leg discount at Goodwill, one of them said. The ringleader stood at ground level, Rick Tanner, the site's foreman, broad-shouldered, red-faced, always squinting beneath a sweat-stained ball cap. He chewed a toothpick with the same intensity he gave his clipboard. Tanner saw Ava and saw an opportunity not for compassion, but for a punchline. Somebody call the VA, he bellowed, loud enough for the whole crew to hear. Looked like one of their wind-up toys got loose. The workers howled. Ava's grip on her marine cap tightened. She kept walking, her shoulders squared, her head held high. She didn't stop, didn't flinch. She had faced enemy fire. This was noise. On the sidewalk nearby, a teenager, probably 17, was already filming. She held her phone up, grinning. "This is going viral," she whispered to her friend beside her. "Wait till TikTok sees the RoboCop lady." No one intervened. No one told them to stop. A few workers shifted uncomfortably, but no one spoke up, not even the assistant site manager, who watched with folded arms and did nothing. Ava didn't yell. She didn't respond. But her silence wasn't weakness. It was restraint. Behind that silence were years of discipline, pain, and sacrifice. Inside, something twisted not with shame, but with a kind of ancient fatigue. It wasn't the first time. It wouldn't be the last. Rick Tanner wasn't done. Bet she never even saw action. He sneered. Probably fell off a bar stool in San Diego. More laughter, more eyes turned toward her. But Ava never looked back. She reached into the collar of her shirt and touched the dog tags resting against her chest. The metal was warm from her skin. She rubbed her thumb over the faded engraving. Her name, her blood type, her branch. It reminded her, you endured, you served, you mattered. The jeers faded behind her as she continued down the sidewalk, dust clinging to her boots, sweat rolling down her neck. She didn't walk faster, she didn't walk slower, but with every step, she reminded herself why she wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. She was almost at the corner when something unusual caught the corner of her eye. A black SUV parked half a block away, windows tinted, engine humming. Someone inside was watching. She didn't know it yet, but justice was already on the move. Just beyond the construction site, parked in the shade of a sycamore tree, sat a black Chevy Suburban. Its engine idled softly. The windshield tinted just enough to hide the man inside. But he wasn't hiding. He was waiting. Logan Beck sat behind the wheel, elbows resting on the steering wheel, gaze locked onto the dusty chaos unfolding 30 yards ahead. He watched as Ava Morgan limped past the gate, surrounded by jeers and laughter. His face, weathered and unreadable, didn't twitch, but his jaw had tightened slightly, deliberately. The marine cap in her hand, the mechanical click of her prosthetic. The way she didn't look back. Logan remembered all of it, not just from this moment, but from years ago in another kind of war. He reached down to his forearm, tugging the cuff of his sleeve up just enough to expose the tattoo inked into his skin. A golden trident wrapped with an eagle and anchor, the insignia of a Navy SEAL, faded with time, but still unmistakable, still earned. The memory came back with clarity sharper than any film. Fallujah, dust, fire, bullets, and blood. Logan's team pinned behind a broken convoy, 3 civilians bleeding out. And then, through smoke and sniper fire, Ava Morgan sprinted across open ground. Not once, not twice, 3 times. Each trip back, she carried someone. The third run, she didn't come back whole. She had never asked for thanks. She'd never attended the medal ceremonies. Logan did. He stood in full dress uniform, receiving commendations, but he never forgot who made it possible for him to stand there at all. Now, seeing her mocked in public, treated like a charity case, a joke, it lit something in him that had lain dormant for years. He picked up his phone. No hesitation, no second thoughts. "It's Beck," he said, voice low and firm. "Send the convoy. It's time." He ended the call and slipped the phone into the dashboard tray. In that moment, Logan Beck wasn't just a retired SEAL. He was a brother in arms. And no one mocked a Marine who'd carried his bloodied body out of hell, at least. Not without learning what honor really looked like. Ava Morgan was born in a corner of Kentucky where dirt roads outnumbered paved ones. And the days began before sunrise with the sound of roosters and tractors. Her family owned a small, struggling farm outside of Richmond, livestock, soybeans, and just enough income to keep the lights on. She grew up knowing hard work, early mornings, and the quiet pride that comes from doing what needs to be done, even when no one thanks you for it. Her father was a man of few words but steady hands. Her mother taught her to sew, ride, and fix a busted fence line before she was 12. But by the time Ava turned 18, She knew the farm wasn't her future. The land was tired. Her parents were aging. She didn't want to watch her life shrink into the same row she'd hoed since childhood. So, she walked into the Marine Corps' recruiting office with nothing but grit and a high school diploma. Boot camp wasn't the shock they expected it to be. Not for a girl who'd hauled hay bales since she could walk. Ava excelled. She wasn't loud, but she was sharp, disciplined, and fiercely protective of those around her. She didn't crave recognition, only purpose. By her second deployment, she had become the kind of Marine others trusted without question. It was in Fallujah, during her third month of patrols, that everything changed. A convoy Ava was assigned to help secure was delivering medical supplies through a dense urban sector. The IED was buried deep beneath the pavement, triggered remotely just as the lead vehicle crossed the intersection. The explosion shattered glass and eardrums alike, flipping a Humvee on its side and igniting its engine. She didn't wait. Ava ran headlong into the smoke and shrapnel. She pulled a dazed corpsman from the wreckage, carried a civilian aid worker, screaming and burned, to the safety of the median, and on her third trip back, she reached for a Marine trapped beneath twisted metal. That was when the second blast hit. She woke up in a military hospital in Ramstein, Germany. Her left leg was gone below the knee. Her records showed she'd earned a Silver Star, a Purple Heart, and the lifelong respect of her unit. But medals can't shield you from the silence that comes after service. Returning home was like entering a different war, a quieter, colder one. Employers saw the prosthetic before they saw her resume. "We're concerned about liability," one manager had muttered. Another simply said, "This job involves long hours on your feet," before sliding her file aside. They didn't care about Fallujah. They didn't ask what she'd done or who she'd saved. To them, she was a risk, a reminder, a walking story they didn't want to hear. And so, the girl who once outran fire settled into a life where even stepping into a grocery store meant bracing herself for stares, questions, or worse, pity. The heat on the job site had reached its peak, with sweat glistening on sunburned foreheads and the air thick with the metallic scent of dust and diesel. Laughter from earlier still echoed faintly round the site, though now it was more scattered, less certain. A few workers had returned to swinging hammers, but most still kept an eye on the sidewalk, half expecting Ava Morgan to turn around and give them a piece of her mind. She didn't, but someone else did. Without warning, a low rumble rolled down the street, not the sound of another dump truck or cement mixer, but the deep, unmistakable growl of military-grade engines. 3 black SUVs came into view from around the corner, moving in formation like a unit on patrol. Their windows were tinted pitch black, their paint polished but unmarked. They didn't honk. They didn't slow. They simply advanced with steady precision and stopped in perfect alignment across the front gate of the job site, blocking the main entrance completely. The construction workers stopped what they were doing, every single one. Someone dropped a wrench. Another took off his hard hat, not even realizing why. The driver's side doors opened first, then the rear ones. 7 men stepped out, all in unison. Their movement fluid, practiced, intentional. They weren't wearing full camouflage or combat gear, but something about them made it clear they didn't need to. Black tactical pants, fitted dark shirts, sturdy boots. Some had sunglasses, others didn't. None were smiling. They didn't speak, didn't gesture. They just looked. They scanned the site like operators breaching a building, measuring angles, assessing threats, noting exits. The construction crew, so loud and rowdy just minutes earlier, had fallen into a stunned silence. Even the foreman, Rick Tanner, stood rooted in place, his mouth slightly open, unsure if this was a government inspection, a security drill, or something worse. There was something different about these men. It was in the way they walked, not swaggering, not charging, just absolute control. Their posture didn't ask for space. It commanded it. One of them, older than the rest and clearly the leader, stepped forward. It was Logan Beck. His salt and pepper hair was cropped close. His arms tattooed with a trident and a line of coordinates hung relaxed but ready. He said nothing as he approached the site. His eyes locked not on the equipment or the foreman or the towering steel beams, but on Ava Morgan, who was now 2 blocks away, and hadn't turned around once. The others fell into position behind him. Without needing to be told, no one knew who they were, no one knew why they were here. But as they stepped forward in perfect sync, the laughter from earlier evaporated like steam on asphalt. And for the first time that day, the only sound on the job site was the wind. The crunch of boots on gravel was the only sound, as Lieutenant Logan Beck closed the distance between himself and the foreman, Rick Tanner, so loud and smug just minutes ago, stood awkwardly at the base of the scaffold, clipboard hanging useless at his side. Sweat had gathered under his arms, his neck flushing red beneath the sun. Beck stopped less than 2 feet away. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Who just humiliated Sergeant Ava Morgan?" he asked. Rick blinked. The name must have hit like a bullet. He stammered, trying to keep his cool. "Look, man. It was just a joke, all right. Nobody meant anything by it." Beck didn't blink. "A joke," he repeated. He turned slightly, just enough for everyone within earshot to catch his words. His voice was calm, but each syllable cut clean through the heavy air. "Sergeant Morgan served 2 combat tours in Iraq. In Fallujah, she dragged 3 wounded soldiers, including me, out of a burning Humvee under sniper fire. She lost her leg. Doing it, that's not a joke." Silence. Every construction worker froze. Some looked down. Others stared, stunned. A few slowly began to understand just how badly the situation had turned. Rick opened his mouth and closed it. The bravado was gone. A younger SEAL stepped forward from the SUV line, tall, buzzcut, his frame coiled like a spring. He held up his phone. "We recorded everything," he said flatly, from the sidewalk. "Every word, every laugh, every insult." Rick's face turned ashen. "In case you forgot," the young SEAL added, mocking a decorated veteran on public property. "While on the clock, that'll go real well when your contractor's office sees it." Logan Beck stepped closer, his tone now cold steel. "She never asked for recognition. She never sought attention. But when my squad was bleeding out and insurgents were closing in, she ran through a kill zone 3 times, while your kind of men would have been crying for extraction." Beck's eyes narrowed. "And you think she's entertainment?" A murmur rippled through the growing crowd. Passersby had begun to stop, drawn by the sight of the SUVs and the tension in the air. Several took out their phones, filming not out of mockery now, but reverence. Beck turned to address them. "You laughed at a woman who served with more honor than most men ever will. That ends now." Rick Tanner's mouth opened again, this time to apologize, but the damage was done. Beck didn't wait for an answer. He turned his back to the foreman in a calculated move louder than words, and behind him, every SEAL snapped into position. The reckoning had begun. Ava Morgan had nearly reached the end of the block when she heard the footsteps, not rushed, not aggressive, just firm, purposeful. She turned slowly, and what she saw stopped her cold. Logan Beck was walking toward her, not in a jog or a hurry, but with the deliberate pace of a man carrying something sacred. Behind him, the 6 other SEALs followed silently in formation. No one else moved. The entire construction site had gone still. No clanging steel, no shouted orders, just the breeze and the sound of boots. Logan came to a halt just a few feet in front of her. His face was unreadable, but his eyes held something Ava hadn't seen in a long time. Recognition, not pity, not curiosity, not confusion, just deep, steady respect. He stood at attention. Then, in a voice both crisp and quiet, he said, "Permission." "To honor you, ma'am." Ava blinked. It took her a full second to realize what he meant. Before she could respond, Logan raised his hand in a precise, textbook salute, and in perfect unison, every member of his SEAL team followed. It was not casual. It was not performative. It was the kind of salute reserved for heroes fallen in battle or those who had walked through fire and lived to tell the story. Their backs were straight, eyes forward, posture unshakable. Ava stood motionless, her throat tightening. Muscle memory kicked in, her right hand lifted, fingers curved with sharp precision. She returned the salute not out of pride, but instinct, the kind that had been drilled into her bones years ago. But this time, it felt different. It felt earned. Logan slowly lowered his hand. Then he reached into a pocket on his tactical vest and pulled out something small and circular. It gleamed faintly in the light, silver-edged, engraved with a trident. He stepped forward, holding it out between both hands. "This," he said, "is the Brotherhood coin, Navy SEAL issue. It's not given, it's earned." He placed it gently in Ava's hand, folding her fingers around it. "You earned it in Fallujah, but you never got it because you were too busy saving lives." She looked down at the coin, then back at Logan. Her lip trembled, but she didn't speak. She couldn't. The weight of the moment pressed against her like armor being refitted after years in storage. Around them, people were no longer whispering. They were watching in reverent silence. Even the young woman who had filmed Ava earlier now held her phone down at her side, eyes filled with something closer to guilt than entertainment. For the first time in years, Ava Morgan stood without feeling like she had to explain who she was. She was seen, and more than that, she was honored. The video of the confrontation spread like wildfire. By nightfall, clips of Logan Beck's words, "She dragged me out of a burning Humvee," were circulating on every major platform. News outlets picked it up within hours. Veterans organizations shared it with captions like, "This is how you treat a hero." And by morning, the construction company's headquarters was flooded with calls, emails, and one unmistakable demand from the public: make it right. Within 24 hours, a formal apology was posted across the company's website and social media. It read, in bold letters, "We deeply regret the disrespect shown towards Sergeant Ava Morgan. Her courage, sacrifice, and service to this country deserve reverence, not ridicule. We are committed to ensuring our sites become places of respect and responsibility." The statement included the announcement that Rick Tanner, the foreman whose words started it all, had been removed from the project and reassigned indefinitely to off-site duties. But more than disciplinary action, what came next was what truly mattered. 1 week later, Ava received an unexpected invitation. The principal of Roosevelt High School, just 2 miles from the job site, wanted her to speak to the students during Veterans Appreciation Week. She hesitated at first. Ava had never seen herself as a speaker, let alone someone who stood in front of hundreds of teenagers. But something about the request felt different. It wasn't about medals or pity. It was about telling the truth. She agreed. On a cool Friday morning, she stepped onto the stage of the Roosevelt High Auditorium, wearing a clean, pressed blouse and the same Marine cap she hadn't put on in over a decade. The room was silent as she walked to the podium, her prosthetic making soft, even taps across the floor. She didn't speak about war in detail. She didn't show photos. She simply said, "Scars don't mean you're broken. They mean you survived something that tried to break you, and you kept walking." The students stood in applause. Some had tears in their eyes. Teachers clapped the longest dot back at the construction site. Change wasn't just spoken. It was set in stone, quite literally, at the front gate. The company embedded a single brick into the ground, framed by polished steel and surrounded by fresh concrete. On it, engraved in crisp, clear lettering, were the words, "SGT Ava Morgan." Built on respect, it didn't stand tall or flashy. It wasn't guarded or lit by spotlights. But every worker passed by it each day. Some stopped and stared. Others nodded. A few placed their hand on it before clocking in. It became more than a tribute. It became a reminder of what happens when honor is forgotten and what it means when a city chooses to remember. The brick bearing Ava Morgan's name didn't just mark the entrance to a job site. It marked the beginning of something far larger. In the weeks that followed, the atmosphere around the construction project began to shift slowly at first, then with momentum no one expected. It started with whispers, then conversations. Workers who once rolled their eyes at words like diversity training or sensitivity workshops now signed up for something called respect in the trades, not because they were forced to, but because, for the first time, they understood what disrespect had cost them. The first class was awkward, rough hands, hard hats, and long silences. But when a veteran named Miguel shared how his brother, also a disabled Marine, was turned away from for job interviews for safety concerns, something cracked open in the room. By the third session, men were listening. By the fifth, They were sharing their own regrets moments. They stayed silent when they should have spoken up. Meanwhile, Ava kept a low profile. She hadn't asked to become a symbol, but the world had. A way of placing symbols where scars used to be. One afternoon, as she sat outside a small cafe 2 blocks from the job site, a young boy walked up beside her table. He was 7, maybe 8, with freckles, bowl-cut hair, and a prosthetic arm that peeked out from the sleeve of his red hoodie. He stood quietly for a moment, staring at her. "My mom says I'm like you," he said. Ava looked up, surprised. "She says I don't need 2 arms to be strong," he continued. "She said maybe I can be a hero, too." Ava felt something stir deep in her chest. She leaned forward, lowering her voice so it carried the weight it deserved. "You already are," she said. "Every day you wake up and choose to keep going, you're a hero." The boy's face lit up, not the polite smile of a child trying to be nice, but the kind of beam that came from being seen, truly seen. He ran back to his mother, who watched from a distance, tears already in her eyes. Word of Ava's quiet kindness spread further than even the viral video had. Veterans began visiting the honor brick just to touch it. Schools organized field trips to the site. The construction company expanded its training to all regional crews, and the community began asking new questions, not just what happened, but what can we change? Respect, it turned out, was contagious, and all it had taken was one moment of courage from a woman who refused to bow her head, even when the world laughed. 6 months after the confrontation at the construction site, Ava Morgan found herself standing backstage at the National Veterans Conference in Washington, D.C. She had never imagined being here, let alone as the keynote speaker. She wasn't a polished politician or a media-savvy author. She didn't have a book deal or a publicist, but the world didn't need another headline. It needed someone who knew what sacrifice looked like in silence and what dignity sounded like when it didn't need to shout. A Navy SEAL had once told her, "You never asked for recognition." That had been true, but now she had something more important than recognition. She had a voice, and she planned to use it. As she stepped onto the stage, the lights dimmed, and the packed auditorium hushed. Rows of active duty service members, veterans, military families, and national leaders looked up as she took the podium. Among them, seated in the front row, were 2 faces Ava recognized immediately. Logan Beck sat in full dress uniform, arms folded respectfully. Beside him sat the boy from the cafe, the one with the prosthetic arm, now wearing a tiny Marine Corps jacket his mother had stitched by hand. His small hand rested protectively over a polished challenge coin, the one Ava had gifted him during their second meeting. Ava stood tall, the stage lights catching the soft edge of her prosthetic. Beneath her skirt, she didn't hide it. She never would again. She took a breath, then spoke. "I used to think honor came from medals," she said quietly, "or ranks or salutes. But I've learned that honor doesn't depend on how many limbs you have or how straight you stand. It comes from how you face the storm when everything tries to break you." The silence in the room was electric. No coughs, no shuffling papers, just breath held still. Some of us come home whole, some of us don't. Some scars are visible, some aren't, but all of them matter. She paused, looking directly at the boy in the front row. Courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it walks with a limp, and sometimes it wears a small red hoodie and holds its head high. The boy beamed, his eyes wide. The applause started slowly, 1 pair of hands, then a few more, until the entire auditorium rose to its feet. The standing ovation lasted over 2 minutes, echoing like thunder through the high ceilings. Ava stepped back from the mic, not to bask in it, but to share it. She had walked alone for years. Now she walked with thousands behind her, and for the first time in a long time, she felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel since the war: pride. The brick at the entrance to the construction site became more than a tribute. It became a destination. Veterans from across the state, and eventually the country, made detours to see it. Some came on motorcycles, with old unit patches still clinging to their jackets. Others arrived quietly on aching knees and walking canes, touching the engraved name with trembling hands. For many, it was the first time they'd seen their own stories honored in public. The community followed. Students came to learn. Teachers brought lesson plans. Families brought flowers. What began as a moment of humiliation had transformed into a living monument, etched not just in stone, but in hearts. From that single moment, a movement emerged. It started online with a simple phrase, shared by the same teenager who had once raised her phone to mock, "Let respect be louder than laughter." The hashtag spread. Stories poured in: veterans, nurses, firefighters, amputees, cancer survivors, all telling the world they were still standing, not in spite of their scars, but because of them. And at the closing of her keynote address at the National Veterans Conference, Ava stood tall in the spotlight and gave the world her final message: scars aren't shame. They're proof you survived. The room rose once again, but this time, no one was clapping for a speech. They were clapping for the truth, spoken by someone who had walked through fire, been mocked in broad daylight, and still stood without bitterness. Ava Morgan had never wanted to be a symbol, but now she was a reminder that heroes walk among us every day, sometimes limping, sometimes quiet, but always brave. What began as a cruel joke on a hot Houston afternoon became something much more, a mirror held up to our society, asking, how do we treat those who've already given us everything? Ava Morgan's story isn't just about one woman, one salute, or one brick at a job site. It's a reminder that dignity doesn't ask to be earned. It should be offered freely. That respect is not about medals or uniforms or whether someone walks with a limp. It's about how we see each other when no one's watching. In today's America, where quick judgments often drown out quiet strength, we need stories like this, especially for those of us who've lived long enough to know that the loudest person in the room isn't always the bravest. Sometimes, courage walks past us in silence, holding a worn cap and never asking for applause. So, let me ask you, have you ever seen someone mocked for their difference and wished you had spoken up? What does honor look like in your community? Today, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Share a moment that restored your faith in people, or tell us about the unsung hero in your town. If Ava's story moved you, help it reach others. Like, share, and subscribe for more true stories that speak to the heart, especially those that our older generation understands best: stories of resilience, of respect, and of quiet strength. And remember, sometimes the smallest gestures, like a salute or a brick in the ground, can rebuild more than walls. They can rebuild us. Thank you for listening. We'll see you in the next